I've just posted my 4-part series on putting that walnut cabinet together. And it was a long thing. But in all honesty, there were more things that I wanted to show, and part 4 was already over 40 minutes long. And there just wasn't time to include things that I thought were fairly important, particularly because I couldn't squeeze them into a very short presentation. And one of the things that I thought was particularly important was the preparation and application of the finish on this particular piece of wood. There were some shots of it at a distance, but there were certain pieces of equipment that I wanted to get back to. I alluded to finishing up sanding the carcass, and I had in my hand a sanding block that I want to explain later in detail, because it's not the normal kind of thing I think that you would find in a wood shop. It's the kind of thing that I taught myself to use while I was finishing guitars and putting on what's called a guitar finish. There were pieces of that cabinet that came out looking pretty close to that, but I didn't put nearly as much energy into it as I would have put into a guitar. That would have had lots more coats of shellac and varnish and lots more polishing down with much higher grits than I was using on that cabinet. But still in all, there's something to be said about how easy that finish was and what nice results you can get from it. So I'd like to do a little more showing what I did in that portion of the build. Now what I'm going to use is just a small cutoff, which was from the very same walnut that I used on the cabinet. This has got some pretty tricky grain in it, going in and out and waving around. But the thing about it is it's got all of the original mill marks on both sides that make you suspicious that you can actually do anything with this. And there are all sorts of tear-outs from the original milling process. So this is the one that I want to work on. It's not going to break my arm to work on that small a piece of wood. But in fact, the thing I'm going to do first is to attack it with my hand plane and see if I can't make this surface look a little nicer. It looks pretty gnarly right now. Well, in just that amount of time, it changed a whole lot. It went from looking like that, which is really flat with shatter marks in it, to actually starting to shine. The original mill marks are already out of it. There's no tear out, but you have to have a really sharp plane to do that. And you don't take any big bites out of it. Make sure you're going downhill always with the grain. If the grain's with you, then this works really nicely. Now, on one side of this board that I was getting the tear out, and you might be able to see some chatter there, and some chatter there, and a little more there. I'm going to be pretty aggressive on this side of the board, and I'm going to start it off with 60 grit because that means I need to take a fair amount of wood down on this side. But on this side, I didn't have nearly that problem. And I think maybe I'll start off with 120 here and not even spend much time at that. There's just a little bit of roughening right there where you might expect all of the wood grain to go haywire. But this side is not going to require nearly as much of the early sanding as this side does. Well, in real time, that only took a few minutes with 60 grit to take out the worst of the tear outs. But it sure does leave a mess behind in 60 grit swirls. But those are lots shallower than what I had before. So I'll put on 120 next and see how that works out. Now, there's a blemish on this particular side which I didn't notice previously, and there appears to only be one. But, and I guess I want to talk to the young folks, because I know I do have some young folks that watch. There's just, I will admit to not being a particular fan of sanding, but you just can't cheat on this portion of the woodworking project. And what I've got right here is something just a little deeper. And if this was a serious project, I would stop with the 120 grit, backtrack to the 60 for just a little while, and make sure that that was out of there. 120 is going to take me quite a while to take that down. So I'll just point out that that's probably going to be visible on the end product. I may be lucky and it would come out during the hand sanding. But as I say, that would be, in my estimation, cheating if I just went on and didn't correct that on what I thought was a real fine piece of woodwork. That would show up and it would haunt me. So you can't cheat on the sanding before you get into finishing. It's really, really, truly important. So this is where I am after 150 grit, and it's feeling pretty nice already. But as I said, I'm going to go through 180 with the sanding block and then up to 220 to really make it flat. And that's what I use for a sanding block, and you can see that it's pretty old. I'll bet you that's 35 or 40 years on that one right there. And it's a very nice size to break up a piece of standard sandpaper. And here's my 180, and this is my sandpaper cutting board. So I've got some general lines laid out that I would use for my various sanding blocks. But what's important here is that it's got an old hacksaw blade on there. And it's just real easy to snap off a piece of sandpaper. And that would be just that simple. So that makes life a little easier, and you don't have to get scissors out or a knife or things of that nature every time you need a piece of paper. So I'll spend, I don't know, the next 8 or 10 minutes. I'm only going to be working on this one side of the one board and take this to completion. But that's going to be pretty dull, as I'm sure that you would agree in a very short period of time. So I finished at 220 with this board, and this is how it actually started up, and I'm pretty sure you can see that this was just a cut on the one board. So this was the rough stock, and this is what is apparently not all that long to bring it down to a very, very nice looking piece of wood. Now the next thing that we do is, now that we like the surface of that wood, is to put linseed oil on. And this manufacturer says put it on for 10 or 5 or 10 minutes, a good coat, and then by all means get it off of there, because if you leave any behind, the oil, linseed oil on the surface of the wood will not polymerize and it will be gunky, and your next steps will fail. So that looks like a pretty good coat to begin with. I'll tell you what, I just love walnut when you put something on it like oil. It's kind of mundane wood until something hits it and just makes it magic. Okay, this is 7 or 8 minutes, and you can see that that's got a little bit of wet sheen to it. And in fact, it's mostly down here in this really gnarly area. Up here it seems to sink in a little better. But still in all, the manufacturer is very insistent that you have to get anything off from the surface because it's going to give you a problem later on. And that's really easy to do. Now that this has been sitting around for about 24 hours at this point, it looks nice and dry. There aren't any wet spots that I missed, so that's the right conditions to put on some good shellac. And I'd like to do it. This is a very soft brush from this particular brush manufacturer, and I think that's a pretty good consideration. Harder bristles, I've noticed, do tend to leave a few more streaks that need to flatten out, and this holds a nice amount of shellac and is easy to spread. Of course, I don't need a big brush like this, but this is my shellac brush. And what I found out was that a couple of good coats with this is all that I needed for that cabinet project, which I thought was getting off a lot easier than I expected. Well, the next thing I'm going to show you is how to make a sanding block, and that on the surface of it sounds pretty ridiculously simple. But in fact, the sanding block that I use for solid flat wood is considerably different from the sanding block I use on finishes. And that's my finish sanding block. And if you can see it, this is a foam rubber hot glued down to a solid base. And the reason that this came into my life was in the course of finishing guitars, and I made quite a number of what are called flat top steel string acoustic guitars. The fact of the matter is the top and the back are not flat. They have slight curves in them, and the sides certainly are very curvy. If you have an outside curve, this block is very easy to use on that. The inside curves require no block at all. But the point is, what this does, it conforms to slight variations in the surface, and it's very forgiving because when you're working on a finish, it's fairly thin and you don't want to break through it, and you want to be just as even as you can be across the whole place that you're working on. So that's where I came up with this, and I'm not actually sure that didn't come out of a book someplace, but it's been with me for, I don't know, when I started making guitars. It was probably 20 or more years ago. And it works very well on a finish. It spreads out so that you're not pushing down really hard in any one given spot. And you can discontinue use as soon as you see that you've taken out the blemishes in the finish and are ready for the next one. So these are ridiculously simple to make if you have a bandsaw with fairly small teeth, like 4 teeth per inch, on a 3/8 inch band or something like that. And that's the kind of thing I make it out of. And you can see that I've already bandsawed a circle out of there for something. But this is really lightweight foam. You can get this in the fabric stores around. It's stupidly expensive in the fabric store, so that if somebody sends you something in through the parcel post and it's wrapped up in foam, keep it forever. There are all sorts of little projects that you can use it for. So I'm going to cut out a square, glue it onto a backer, and then use it in this next step of taking down my shellac finish with a 220 grit paper. I'll give that a few minutes to cool down, but that's ready to go. And that's worked out very well. What I wanted to do was get all of the shine off that, make it feel just glass smooth. Shellac is a very, very forgiving thing to work with. It does have its limitations as a finish, however. If it's going to be around wet, and particularly alcohol, anything spilling on that of alcohol nature is going to attack the finish. So you have to worry about that. And the next step with the wax is also not very conducive to good finishes if it gets wet. So this particular finish is one for furniture that's going to be away from drinks being sat on it. Now, I'm using brie wax here, which is actually fairly new for me. I have traditionally used Minwax, but I thought I'd give this a try since everybody seems to say that this is such wonderful stuff. And it is, it's got a different feel to it from Minwax. This is a combination of carnauba and beeswax, and its solvent is toluene, which isn't particularly good for you. So using this with plenty of ventilation is very strongly recommended by the manufacturers. And since I, in my history, have used toluene for work, I know that it's not very good for you to get on your skin or in your lungs. And one of the other things that I would point out about wax finishes like this, they say to let it dry. I don't believe that you really need to let it dry a whole lot, but it never works correctly with 1, 2, or maybe even 3 coats of polish on it. It just is splotchy until you get a bunch of coats on it. Although this one went on fairly well, it's still a little splotchy. Well, I showed most of the pieces of this in that lengthy cabinet build, but I thought it would be instructive just to put all of the preparation and finishing pieces together, just to demonstrate that it's pretty straightforward and relatively easy to do if you're prepared for what the results are going to be. And there's a board that got cut in half, and on my right and your left, I guess it is the original board, and this one here is the finish. And it didn't take very long to get there. It's a beautiful wood to work with. You can do this with all sorts of things. The beauty of working with shellac is that it can be used very rapidly on top of the linseed oil. You could also put polyurethane on it, but as I understand it, you'd have to let the linseed oil cure out for as much as several days or a week before you can actually apply the polyurethane. The shellac doesn't seem to have that problem because it's alcohol based. Works very well right on top of it within a few minutes. But it's an unforgiving type of finish if it's going to be around liquids. It gets marred, so there are times when you're going to want to use polyurethane and stretch out the process a little bit, and times when you don't need to and you can finish it up pretty quickly with shellac and wax. So, thanks again for watching. I'm Tom Stevens. Come on back, I'll have something else again sometime.